we'll get that. Okay, great. So let's just start. We're all here. Yay. All right. So welcome everybody to conversation with Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz and our Florida fellow Gillian Daley, who was actually an intern with a congresswoman last year, right before she accepted her Ignite Fellowship. And so we're super excited for this conversation. For those that want to Ignite refresher, we are a national nonpartisan 501c3 that builds political ambition in young women to ultimately run for office. We have been doing this work for a decade now, and we are in about 30 states across the country. Like all of you, we have moved our programming nationally and have been hosting different conversations across the country, well, any part of the world, frankly, right now, on these hot topics that we are experiencing. And so today's conversation with the Congresswoman will be a bit about her path to political office. So we can all hear the background story on that. And then her and Gillian will transition into a conversation about how women are disproportionately represented in terms of COVID-19 and some policy issues and pieces of legislation that the Congresswoman is championing around that. So without further ado, I will hand it over to the Congresswoman to share her path to politics and why she is currently serving.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Gillian. Really glad to be here with the young women of Ignite, and very proud that even in a crisis, that there are fierce young women who are blazing a trail and are really drawing upon inner strength to be able to keep going and make sure that we can press forward on expanding women's leadership opportunities and making sure that we, even in a crisis, take on the challenges that we know we must, and frankly, so often are solved by the full engagement and participation of women. So I'm so glad to be here with you. You'll uplift me. Hopefully I'll have an opportunity to uplift you as well. And obviously, this is such an incredibly difficult time, one that we have never seen, any of us living today has ever seen in our lifetimes. It's truly a once in a century crisis that I hope no one ever has to experience again. We will unfortunately be in this for the foreseeable future until we have a vaccine and a treatment. We're going to have to be engaged in very aggressive social distancing in most of the country for some time to come. Certainly, at least until we can make sure that we can keep people safe. And I want to urge everyone, I'll say this at the top and say it at the end, make sure that you respect the virus in the sense that Dr. Fauci, our nation's foremost public health expert, has repeatedly said that the virus is going to control our timeline. As impatient as we might get, as much cabin fever as most of us might have, as stir crazy as you might find yourself going, it's really important that we respect the virus in the sense that we can make the best laid plans, but if we are going to make sure that we stress the value of life and that we make sure that we are keeping in mind that we have to make sure we keep people safe, then we have to be respectful of one another in order to be able to do that. So I look forward to the Q&A session. I'll try to get through my remarks as quickly as I can, and then the fun part's always your questions. So I want to share a little bit about my own personal story. I have an unusual path, a little bit of an unusual path to politics. I had no political background whatsoever, had anyone in my family be involved in politics growing up. I didn't have a political family remotely, except, I had my parents instill their democratic leaning values in me and my brother around our family dinner table growing up. But, other than voting, that was the extent of my family's involvement in politics. And I went to college and had plans to be a veterinarian, and chemistry and I didn't get along very well. So I had to find another pathway. And then at the same time that I was needing to figure out what direction I was going to go in my life, I got involved in student government, which I had been involved with in high school and had really been engaged in community service and had always been taught growing up. My family is Jewish, and we really embrace the values of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, and our responsibility to give back. And so I'd always been involved in helping others and making the world a better place. So what better way to extend that than getting involved in student government at college? Long story short, my involvement in student government was like getting hit by a lightning bolt. I realized that I could make public service a career path, and that I could spend every day making other people's lives better if I chose that path. And so that's what I decided to do. Did internships in college for state legislators and got involved in real world politics and college Democrats, and then worked on real campaigns, and actually proud to say that I was a student for Biden when he ran for president in 1988. And so my first vote for president was cast for Joe Biden. But that's not so important. What's important is that that's how I got grabbed by the idea that I could make sure that I could devote my life's professional work to lifting up others. So fast forward that I got a job as a legislative assistant to my former boss. My first job out of college was to be a legislative assistant to my state representative, and had a chance, because he knew I wanted to run for office one day. I worked for him for about 4 years, and he called me at home in the middle of the legislative session and said, this redistricting has my district, the one that I lived in and that he represented, your house, the house that I had just moved into when my husband and I were about ready to get married, is in my district. And he knew I wanted to run for office one day. I thought that would be when my one-day kids were a little older, and that I would be able to pursue my dream to run. But then Representative Deutsch said, I'm running for Congress. I was going to run his congressional campaign. I think I should find someone else to do that, because you can win this seat, Debbie. You should run now. I was 25 years old, you should know. We had just bought our first house, and my husband and I had been married for a year. Not exactly the most convenient time of anyone's life to launch a long shot campaign for the state legislature. And of course, when I thought about doing that and began talking to people and seeking advice, all the good old boys in my community said, oh, no, dear, that's very nice, but come back to us in a few years. There's many other men waiting in line to run for this seat, and we'll let you know when it's your turn. So I was very polite and thanked them for their advice and said, well, I'm going to run anyway. And so when I win the primary, and I ended up in a 6-way Democratic primary, I really hope to have your support in the general election. And of course, never thinking they were going to see me again, they all said, of course, we're happy to support you if you win the primary. The difference for them was if, for me, I said when. And so I had to make up in shoe leather what I lacked in resources. As you would imagine, if you've been married for a year, don't come from family money, never been involved in politics prior to the job that I had. And by the way, I only lived in my community for 3 years. I really had to take my case to the people. So I went door to door, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week for 6 months, eventually knocked on 25,000 doors myself. And in that 6-way primary, where I had 4 male opponents and 1 other woman, on the day of the primary, I was so worried that I would not be successful that I just had my family in my family room to watch the returns scroll on a very old public access TV station, because that's how they did it back in 1992. And I won that election with 53% of the vote in a 6-way primary, and won that election outright. My success was called the surprise of the state, and I was the youngest woman at the time ever elected to the Florida legislature. Eventually, I served 8 years, served in the state Senate for 4 years, and then had a chance to run for the U.S. Congress in 2004, when my predecessor in the legislature decided to run for U.S. Senate and gave me a nice heads up that he was going to be announcing in a couple of months. I had the little tiny wrench thrown in the works that I was 2 months pregnant with our youngest child by then, had already had twins who were 4 at the time. And so, again, not the most convenient time, but there's never going to be a convenient time in your life to seize the moment and go after and pursue your dreams. And use every ounce of confidence you have when you know that you could do the best job on behalf of the people you're seeking to represent or in any goal that you pursue. So I'm here to tell you that you should grab the bull by the horns and not pass up an opportunity, even if it's not the most convenient time in your life, because you never know. Now, moving on, in Congress, some of the things that I've done to try to make sure that we can continue women's empowerment is I started a Moms in the House caucus. We now have a record number of women serving in Congress, 127, and of those, 28 of us have school-aged children. That's the largest group of women with school-aged children in history. And when I was elected in 2004, I was one of the only women serving at the time that had young kids. I gave birth to my youngest daughter during the campaign, and she was 1 when I was sworn in, and the twins were 5. So you can imagine the kind of balancing act I had to engage in. And so, you just make it work. But now that we have a network of moms in the House pulling us together so we can lean on one another and really have that organized effort to be able to share and bounce things off of each other and have a circle of trust, because, sometimes you just don't always want to talk about very personal things going on in your family or challenges you might face that your non-parent colleagues might not understand. That's been important. Of course, we've had to impact that in the questions and answers, but the coronavirus is disproportionate to so many women. 85% of home health care and personal aid, and 66% of grocery store cashiers and salespeople require millions of women's exposure every day just to keep our communities healthy and safe. So the CARES Act needed to make sure we took care of those families and those women, and we made sure we did. In the third package, we included $100 billion in grants to healthcare providers. That should really help women who make up nearly 80% of that workforce in healthcare and 90% of registered nurses. So I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I see some people in the notes a little bit that are saying it's breaking up. I'm not sure if that's my connection or yours, but I'm happy to take any questions you have, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank
Gillian.
you so much for giving me the opportunity to have this chat with you. So I'm not sure if you remember, but last year I had the opportunity to intern in your district office. Yeah, it was incredible. So thank you for that opportunity, first of all, because that opened so many doors to even the Ignite Fellowship that I have now. And thank you again for
our
questions that I'm going to dive into.
We're all about girl power on our team.
Exactly. So my first question for you would be just about COVID-19 in relation to women. We know, and I know from working in your office, that you have prioritized women's issues from the get-go. And we also know that COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting women. So could you go into a little bit of why that might be, and then also sort of some of the things that you might be doing to combat that?
Sure. As I briefly mentioned, yes, I will repeat what I just said about the legislation. I'll repeat it now because it's kind of part of the question.
Yeah.
So the legislation that we passed, the CARES Act, really, because women are disproportionately on the front lines of combating this crisis. I mean, I think the stats I read were 90% of nurses are women. We have nearly 80% of the healthcare workforce are women. Of course, you have a disproportionate number of waitresses, food servers, grocery store cashiers. I mean, you everywhere you turn, the safety net of this crisis that are keeping people afloat are women. So making sure that we had $100 billion in nutrition assistance in the bill, and also food assistance $100 billion for healthcare worker assistance in the bill. That was critical. Making sure that we had, I think it's $26 billion in nutrition assistance, because we've got to make sure that people who are dealing with food insecurity suddenly, who if their job has had an interruption, are going to need that assistance. That's really critical. But my personal effort, especially since the start of this crisis, has been focused on women and children at risk. So tonight, for example, I'm doing an internet safety webinar with parents of children across our community who obviously, kids are online now all the time, and it's beginning younger and younger. But the more, the internet is an amazing thing, and so are apps and all the associated social media, and they open up the world to children, but they also expose our children to the world. And so they are far more vulnerable when they're online and parents aren't able to, or really focused on how much attention they have to pay to what their kids are doing online, so that they don't get taken advantage of or possibly become the victim of a hack or have an unknown predator. Who there are plenty of predators who pose as someone they're not to try to lure children, and it can be a very dangerous place. And so we try with these internet safety webinars to help educate parents just about some of the tools that there are available to keep their kids safe. I also spoke yesterday to both of our superintendents that cover the school districts in South Florida, because now that kids are home and online for school and they don't have that trusted teacher or social worker at school that they can reach out to, and maybe at home with their abuser as opposed to at school, putting a button where they can get to that child abuse hotline on the page of the website. Our community uses Canvas. Putting that button visible and accessible for that child so that they can get to that hotline as quickly as possible is another way that we're really on the front lines here. And now that I'm home, and we're trying to do everything we can to keep people safe.
Thank you so much. That's incredible.
Oh. Did you have another question?
Yes, sorry, it broke up for a second, but thank you so much.
Sure.
That is incredible innovation. I didn't even think about the vulnerabilities for people in abusive households. But that's incredible. I guess my third question is my second question is going to be just kind of leading into that. For the young women of Ignite who are watching this, or who are maybe at home, that are interested in politics and interested in kind of just emulating those ideas that you just said, how would you advise them in going about advocating for women in the COVID-19 era? How would you advise them to advocate for those solutions that you just suggested? Do you have any advice for the people watching this who might want to just lobby and advocate for women who are suffering?
There's a lot of ways that you can reach out online, and a lot of webinars like this one where you can get engaged with social service organizations, nonprofits that are of interest to you. And you can also be a voice yourself as far as making sure that you're reaching out to the people that represent you at every level of government, using your own social media platforms to amplify the important issues today, and using, I know what I've been doing, since we've all had to really be home, is trying to make sure that I can connect with people like this, as opposed to just, having a phone to my ear, which is so much more cold and impersonal, and try to gather people of like mind so that you can talk with one another and you don't lose that synergy of playing and off of one another and interacting. So, convening your neighbors, your friends, your college roommates, I have so many text chains going myself, where we're just not only blowing off steam, but also getting ideas from one another. And so staying engaged, and I guess the best advice I have, that the arc of what I'm saying is, don't be a couch potato, even though we're all in a very couch potato environment right now. And that is, I'm sure that given that this is an organization named Ignite, that there's no couch potatoes out there, but use every tool at your disposal to be able to connect with people and be able to weave together the strength of this organization.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gillian. Thank you, Congresswoman. We are going to take a couple questions. I know we don't have time for all of them, so I'm just going to pick and choose a couple.
All right.
Lauren C. Anderson, coming from some part of the beautiful country we are in. Can you talk about the relationship you have with your fellow female members of Congress? And I'll add to that a little bit and just what you're all doing in terms of COVID-19 right now.
Sure. I will give you sort of a little preview example of what we're doing. We will release a bipartisan Moms in the House video tomorrow, where a number of women members in that are moms of young kids, most of us with our kids, did kind of a public service announcement video that we're going to launch tomorrow, just to urge people to stay at home, stay healthy, make sure that they were doing what they were supposed to do so that we could keep people safe. And so because we have this caucus of women members who have young children, we're able to use that platform that we have. And so we're trying to use our commonality to be able to, and influence, to be able to reach more people. And we get together through the Moms in the House caucus several times a year around different issues. We've had the only female member of the FCC with us for breakfast. We've sat down with the former head of OMB, Sylvia Burwell Matthews, and she was also the Secretary of HHS under President Obama, to talk with her about healthcare and family issue and balancing work and family. We have a women's caucus that is both separately partisan, and we have a bipartisan women's caucus that has issues around which we organize that are important to women as well.
Amazing. Thank you. This next question comes from Robin. She wants some advice for a 58-year-old woman who wants to be political at this point, but I'm sure there are people here that are 18 to 58 or anywhere in between. So if this is their moment of political awakening or civic engagement, what advice do you have for them?
So I see her question, and I'm not sure where she's from, and I'm also not sure, since I know this is a nonpartisan organization, but get involved in your local political club, Democratic or Republican club. That's the really most grassroots way to engage politically. It's also a good place to begin organizing, and the most basic important grassroots work is done through those Democratic clubs. Get involved in the presidential campaign. Honestly, but the best advice that I have for anyone that is just beginning to get involved in politics, no matter what age you are, is maybe work on a local race and volunteer to go door to door with the candidate. Because I will tell you, having knocked on 25,000 doors myself, I didn't really have too many volunteers back then because no one really knew me and no one thought I would win. So I did most of that walking by myself. It's such a pleasure to have somebody hold your clipboard. And I mean, I guess we don't use clipboards these days. Now there's now we walk with technology, but there's a lot to juggle. Your walk piece, your phone, all the accoutrements that go with trying to make sure that you can get the contact recorded. You have that kind of up close and personal FaceTime with someone running for office who will know you afterwards and who will be indebted to you and appreciate you. It's really important FaceTime that there's not a long line of people, especially here in Florida, because it's very hot work, since it's mostly hot all the time here in South Florida. So, right, Gillian? I mean, if you're going to go out and walk door to door, you got to be dedicated. So you give a few hours a week to a candidate. You help them win, and you burn off a few pounds in the heat. They're going to appreciate you down the road, I can assure you.
Yeah, your Fitbit's going to be buzzing all day long. This question actually comes from Lindsay, who's a candidate herself right now, running for county commissioner, and she is doing virtual meetings to talk with constituents. Any other thoughts in the candidate world in terms of connecting with folks during social distancing?
Yes, because I'm doing some of this myself, not as a candidate, but as a member of Congress, because I have the same issue. I normally, in a crisis, I mean, we get a lot of we get a lot of hurricanes in Florida, and so we're dealing with the aftermath of natural disasters all the time. And so when we have a situation like that, we have to suspend all normal operations. And so whether you're not going to get information out to constituents, which I often do, I have instead of going door to door, I've gotten access, which you could too as a candidate, to your voter file, and you can phone match it, and then just making calls to voters, make sure it's kind of phone matching that is the people who vote the most often. And I don't know whether you have a primary or not, but make sure that it's super voters who are really the most likely to go to the polls. You're call and say, please vote for me. What you're going to do is say, hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm Lindsay. My eyes are not good enough to be able to see your last name. I'm Lindsay. I just wanted to call. I know we're in the midst of a crisis. I wanted to just get your thoughts and your mind and get some feedback from you. And just it's not the easiest work and be frustrating. If you have an automatic dialer, it saves you time so that you can only have calls that are connected, where it skips the calls that aren't, where someone's not home. So automatic dialer, get the list of voters that vote the most often. Just check in with them. You can say you're running for county commission, but that you just wanted to see what's on their mind and if there's anything they need help with. That's my best advice virtually in this moment.
Thank you. Do you have time for one more question? Okay.
Yeah,
Jane, can you talk about a time when you've had a negative challenge in your political career and how you handled it?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, when you're a woman, you have more than one of those, usually sometime during the course of your career, because being a woman and being in a a sort of trailblazing situation in almost any instance is a challenge. When I was DNC chair, throughout my tenure, I was the longest serving. I am the longest serving chair of either the DNC or RNC in modern times. I spent almost 6 years as chair, and went through a re-election with President Obama, and then the election with Hillary Clinton as our nominee. And so, never mind the end, because that was a totally different situation. But frankly, wouldn't have happened to a man the same way it did to me. But throughout my tenure, there were always things that were much more difficult, and that I found myself having to answer for. Really, that in most situations, my decision making wouldn't have been questioned if I were a man. And so you just have to be ready for that, because even though, when you're elected at 26 years old and you spend most of your career not having your gender be an obstacle, when you get higher up in the food chain of leadership and you are holding a position that perhaps someone else wanted that isn't a woman, or whether they are or are not, the higher you go, the more they come after you. And if you're a woman, it becomes even more challenging. So just being very cognizant of that is important. Reaching out to and over communicating with the people that you're working with, and making sure you can't always, I'm a very direct person, so I always have to remind myself that you catch more bees with honey. But you also have to make sure that you remember at the end of the day, you're the one that has to make the decision, and you want to make sure that you get buy-in to those decisions in a way that helps smooth the landing if people are going to disagree with the way you've chosen, the path you've chosen. So I think that is all the time I have, Sarah. So I appreciate the time that I'm able to spend with you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Congresswoman.
You're welcome. Gillian, thank you so much.
We really appreciate your time with us.
You guys, thank you so much. Keep it up and keep in touch with us. We'd love to spend some time with you going forward and help you with your work.
Perfect. Thank you.
So much.
Stay safe and healthy, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.